Everybody's ready at NERC? Oh, there we go. We'll call this meeting to order. If we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I have a flag right here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Environmental Management Policy Committee. I guess we'll skip introductions. I think Kathy kind of introduced everybody when she said hi, so that's nice. We can move on to the meeting minutes of June 3rd, 2021, and we can do a roll call vote, I think. That way we can get our attendance as well. Is there a motion on the June 3rd, 2021 meeting minutes?
Motion to approve, Jeff Benson.
Second, Lori Cagle.
All right, motion and a second. Can we get a roll call?
Sure. I'm sorry, one moment. We'll start with the appointed commissioners. Robert LeMay, Robert Forster, Bill Emerson.
Yes.
Thank you. Dinah Dumbriz, Jocelyn Denham, Kevin Brightsky, Jeff Benson. Jeff
Yes.
Benson, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Jan Bapt. Okay, and we'll be moving on to local government representatives. Jennifer Gonzala. Richard Morris
Yes.
Rowe. Oh, Jennifer, thank you.
Yes.
Richard
Mor-
abstain.
Abstain, thank you. Abstain. Brenda Scott Henry. Tim Kingsland,
Yes.
thank you. Michael Koos. Sarah Nimitz. Wendy Miss. George Topple. And then we have our stakeholder members, one vote per organization. Dunesland Sierra Club. That would be George Malice, Leslie Dorworth, Reggie Corthals, Kelly Wenger, Kay Nelson, Lori Cagle,
Yes.
thank you. Deb Backus, Susan Mahalo,
Yes.
thank you. Daniel Goldfarb. And that concludes roll call.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll show them minutes as approved, and want to welcome everybody this morning. Moving on to public comments? Is there anyone? We will have announcements later in the agenda, but is there anyone that has any public comments on anything on our agenda at this point? All right. Hearing none, we will move right along, keep things moving to the Northwest Indiana Regional Greenhouse Gas Inventory. And Kathy, you're prepared to do a little presentation on that?
Yes, Kathy Sipple.
right.
I am, and Alec will be joining me in the presentation. So Alec, can you go ahead and share your screen? I'll get things started, then turn it over to him. He is down in Bloomington. He is in school. He was one of our wonderful interns and has graciously agreed to come back just today to do this, though his internship ended a few weeks ago. So this project started with this group. A lot of the people probably on this call, along with some others. We brought this project before this committee and you graciously brought it to the executive committee who approved it. And let's see, we got started. Kathy, oh, that was to everybody. Okay, Alec, we can go ahead and do the next slide. For those of you who may not know me, I am Kathy Sipple, and I am the Regional Resilience Coordinator for Earth Charter Indiana. It's based in Indianapolis, but it is a statewide organization. We just a couple days ago had our 6th annual Climate Leadership Summit. It was held in person down in Evansville and also had a virtual component. So obviously this is past, but I do want to let you know that recordings of the session are now available. I'll put the email of the administrative person. There was some really, really great content, and the things that we've been doing with this project are so in alignment. There were, mayors and city council people and regional planners that all talked about, best practices in, climate leadership. And what we've just done is definitely, ground zero for being on this path. So if you missed it, don't fret, you can watch those recordings. But if you do have the ability to attend, either in person, if that's possible next year, or virtually, there is some great information. So I really encourage you to get on their email list. I myself, for those who don't know, live in the region. I am a Valparaiso resident. So we can go ahead to the next slide, Alec. 2 years ago, I want to say that the Climate Leadership Summit was held in Goshen, and for the first time, it was as close to home, here in Northwest Indiana as it had ever been. So that was the first year that we really had any population size of impact attending. There were, I think, about 10 of us that came from Northwest Indiana, from mostly Lake County, but also Porter, and a few from LaPorte County. In fact, from LaPorte County, Nancy Moldenauer and Steve Perkins were 2 of the presenters, and they presented about how they had participated in IU's Environmental Resilience Institute that year in 2019. They had been appointed a climate fellow / intern to help them do a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory. I think this group has also heard from Brenda Scott Henry. Gary was also in that first cohort. With Indiana University's Environmental Resilience Institute, they kind of have an ongoing rotation of what programs they support each year. So in odd years, like we're in now, they do this regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and then next year will be climate action planning. So back to how this fits with the Climate Leadership Summit, the ERI folks were at that leadership summit, and it really allowed a lot of people from the region to get interested in their toolkit, whether people do the greenhouse gas emissions inventory or not. Visiting the ERI website, I think, is going to give you a lot of information that they offer about webinars, their toolkit, something called the Hoosier Resilience Index that you can do on your own, even if your community didn't take part in the cohort, although a lot of us did by now. Anyway, can't say enough good things about this ERI, the Environmental Resilience Institute. They were kind of the driver for the whole thing. And we invited Andrea Webster, who just recently has moved on from ERI, to come up to an event that we hosted in February of 2020, called the Climate Action Blitz. There were some citizens in Highland that hosted that event over there. It was very well attended. We had 65 people attend from 13 different Northwest Indiana communities. And that was kind of the seed that moved this along. We were really interested in seeing how we could partner with ERI. Next slide, Alec. So again, this brought us to where we are today, what we're here to present to you. This is a PDF. We're not really prepared to actually turn the pages of the PDF. We want to make sure that this data is, really locked up and as tight as it can possibly be. But Alec, the young man who is going to be doing the presentation, and I'll turn it over to very shortly, he was the one who hung in there and made sure we actually compiled this thing, the work of 5 different interns, and got it into a cohesive document. So it's very nearly ready. Why this project is important, we really literally made history. Not only were we the very first regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory in the state, we're one of just a handful across the country. There are very few, although it is becoming more normal. Chicago just released theirs about a month ago. And it's becoming, more prevalent as people seek, ways to mitigate climate, the impacts of changing climate. So this is going to provide some baseline data that we are going to use not only for future climate action plan development, hopefully next year, but also as a baseline for future greenhouse gas emissions inventories. You can see that the year on it, if you're looking carefully, it says 2017. That's like the best that we could do to get all of the data that we needed to pull together on this inventory. The best practice is not to do it one time and then just forget about it. It's established as a baseline, and hopefully we can keep revisiting this maybe every 3 to 5 years, and we can see what actions we're taking are having impact, on moving that needle and addressing some of the greenhouse gases. So it's a baseline. We'll talk a little bit more about methodology shortly. Alex is going to handle that, and you can ask all the questions you want about how we put this together. A lot of people had questions throughout the process. And it really allowed us to engage some interns. Most of them were from the area. Alec is the outlier. He's from Terre Haute, living in Bloomington, and he caught on real quick and immersed himself as fully as anybody. But there were 4 other interns who have roots here in the region, and some of them were called to participate in this project because their studies were in close alignment, but some of them stated as a reason they wanted to give back, and they were just really interested in making our region a great place to live. So I gave them some real world experience, and honestly, working collaboratively, it provided a tremendous cost savings. If you were to hire somebody, a professional consultant, to do what we just did, you could probably pay starting at $15,000 or so. I've heard up to $25,000. And Alec was paid by IU. This is not embarrassing for Alec. I asked him ahead of time. He was paid $4,800 as a stipend, and our part that we were responsible for was only $1,500. So that's because of grants and because of IU and because of all the stuff. So, and in other places in the cohort around the state, they had 1 intern to 1 inventory, and Alec himself handled Porter County and Lake County, and other interns handled up to 3 inventories each. So Alec, I'll go ahead and do next slide. It's just a little bit about the timeline. We began with training at IU back at the end of May. June 1st is when students really hit the ground running. Right now, where we are is still trying to conclude, even though we've got a finished PDF. We want to get some, just making sure that the data is as good as it can be. It did take quite a while to get some of the data, and frankly, we had to do more what was called population scaling than we really would have liked. But it's kind of, we can only do the inventory that we can do with the data that we get. So all of that is notated throughout. If we can still get better data, we will do the best that we can to make sure that's rock solid. And then just some consistencies on pie charts. We had 5 different interns, so we just want to get some stylistic things. And honestly, what I'd also love to do as part of that inventory report is to put in some best practices that people are already doing, looking ahead to the climate action plan. I know that we've got some movers and shakers in the region, and it would be really cool just to give people a taste of what's ahead along with the data. So I've got some ideas, and luckily we were able to retain one of our interns from the team, Julianne, who's not here today, but she attends Purdue, to continue to work with us on a limited capacity through the end of the year. So I think that'll be real helpful to just put those finishing touches on the report, as well as to put us in good stead for the climate action plan phase, which I'll talk about a little bit more at the end. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, Alec. All right, so with this slide, I'll first just tell you a little bit about the team, and then we'll turn it over to Alec and let him tell you about how it was to be part of this team, and then he can go into methodology. But again, we've got Alec here with us today. We also had Angelica Lopez, who was another IU ERI student appointed to us. Hiru is from Gary, and he goes to Purdue in West Lafayette. He had a cybersecurity background. I'll let Alec tell you about his own background, but Alec and Hiru were both our kind of data guys. Angelica had more of a environmental sciences background. Lauren also attends Purdue and is at Highland. She has an environmental policy background, and Julianne is in engineering and wants to possibly work in an engineering firm doing stormwater management with native plants is kind of her thing that she's looking at. Staff support came we're very happy and grateful to Kathy Luther and Joe Exel, obviously from NERC. And then I provided kind of like project management support in a part-time capacity. And then we had, lots of really helpful points of contact within participating jurisdictions. Jennifer Gadzala, I mean, gosh, bless you. I think you were there. You had like 100% attendance as far as I could see. And there were others of you as well. Some of you, couldn't make it so much. And that was really another benefit, honestly, of participating in this regional way, is we all had a little, piece to carry, and it didn't cost you as much, time or money having to learn all the technology, since we had, the staff people there to be consistent. But it certainly is enhanced, I think, when we've got strong participation from the counties and the cities. And then we also had additional support from ICLEI. Their acronym no longer matches what they're about. It stands for Local Governments and Sustainability. Thanks for the pop-up, Kathy. Just saying that we did have additional staff support from Scott Weber on the transportation data. Absolutely correct. And we had, I know we've got Lori from South Shore Clean Cities today. They kind of weighed in. I don't know that we were ultimately able to get quite the data that we had hoped to get from them, but we definitely reached out to a lot of different people. And this is by no means complete, but yes, special shout out to Scott Weber. Yeah. And Little Calumet River Basin Development Commission, wanted to thank them because they made a financial gift that allowed us to give the interns that we hired outside of IU, stipend that was a little bit closer to what Alec got as an ERI climate fellow. It wasn't quite there, but also citizen support and funding came from Northwest Indiana Region Resilience. They were the citizen group that really got this whole thing started. They were the ones who started boots on the ground, attending that climate leadership summit in Goshen 2 years ago, hosted the Climate Action Blitz, and I wouldn't be here today talking to you if they didn't help and make this possible. They reached out to their own city councils, their own mayors, their own county councils, and asked them to please look at participating in this. And it was a very, very much a labor of love to bring this all together. So I'm deeply grateful to everyone who played a role. And with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Alec, the true star of the show. Alec, can you tell us a little bit about your background and maybe how it was to work with this team? We had originally thought that we would have office space at NERC, and then with COVID, we ended up having to work, remotely. So that definitely introduced some interesting challenges.
Yeah, so thank you, Kathy, for the very kind and generous introduction. But yeah, hi, I'm Alec Thies. I come from Terre Haute, but I'm living in Bloomington, a senior going to IU. Studying informatics with a minor in environmental management. So informatics is it's kind of like computer science, but it's got more of a focus on understanding how technologies interact with different fields of study. So my goal was to figure out how to best utilize technology for environmental studies and things like that. So I've really enjoyed working with this team. We all had a really great set of backgrounds. Even being online, we figured out ways to make it work, even though collaboration was a little difficult at times. But yeah, I was really thankful to work with everyone, especially not being from the region. It was really great to have the support of everyone and helping me understand everything. And I'm really glad that we could all contribute to something so meaningful. So to go further into the study itself, we did the Northwest Indiana Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory. And what this detailed was 14 separate communities, 3 of which were counties. And so myself in particular was responsible for Lake and Porter counties. So if you have any questions about them as a whole, I'll be able to answer those more directly. But all the other communities did fall into the counties that I covered, except for LaPorte and LaPorte County. But I don't have more specific information on those. You'd have to refer to the other interns. But yeah, like Kathy said, each of the interns was able to handle 2 to 3, maybe 4 of these. I think it was only 3 max. But and it was really great because efficiency wise and cost savings wise, this really worked out well, where each intern could really get a lot of work done over the summer, when usually an intern is directly paired with one community. So my goal today is to kind of go through first showing what the results of an inventory like this look like, and what it means for all of these communities. But I also want to try to explain as best I can how we got there. I understand there might be questions about methodologies and how we made this happen and all of our best practices and things like that. So we will have a section for Q&A specifically after my overview, but if anything important comes up, you can just ask in the chat or unmute yourself, and I'd be happy to answer as much as I can to explain it all. So getting started, this was one of my responsibilities, was Lake County. This is what the most basic graph you'll see looks like for our reporting. As you can see, and this is for the 2017 baseline year, like Kathy mentioned, because it aligns with the inventories that Gary and Michigan City did a couple years ago. They did 2017 inventories. But as you can see, it covers all of these different sectors of transportation, water and wastewater, energy, which contains commercial, industrial, and residential, as well as process and fugitive emissions. And so you can kind of see the proportions by sector. And I also should note that for Lake County and for a couple other communities, we did make sure to make clear that and it is clear that the industrial energy sector is very massive. And I think this really isn't a surprise for the communities of Northwest Indiana. But the important thing is recognizing these emissions, but also understanding that industry isn't necessarily something that governments will have more as direct control over as some of the other sectors. So that's why we also wanted to include the chart that excludes industry as well. Because when governments are implementing policies for climate action planning, a lot of it might go towards the commercial and residential sectors, transportation, or utilities and waste and things like that. So it's important to note that these emissions are happening because they're contributing very much, but there's only so much you can do about it. And so typically, when we're looking at a community, Lake County isn't a typical community for this type of inventory. Usually the industry is much less, and the greatest sectors are residential and commercial, followed by transportation. And you'll see that reflected later on. But for a community, you'll see these charts, and then we have more specific data with actual numbers for every sector as well. This isn't too entertaining to look at, but it's there if you're interested. And then we have even further, more detailed information for every single community. So this goes into almost every record we have, explaining the individual gases, like say from NIPSCO, what did they contribute to carbon dioxide? So you can look for that too. But this is what a more typical community would look like. For Lake Station, I was not responsible for Lake Station. I believe Angelica Lopez was, but this is what you would more likely see for communities that aren't so industry heavy. There's a big section in transportation followed, and then there's also residential and commercial energy that really stand out. So for all of these communities, you, as people of Northwest Indiana, understand the community's emissions best. We are just here to report the data. And from this, you can best decide, this will be the climate action planning phase that Kathy talks about next, is how you decide to deal with this data and understand it, and how you can use it moving forward to reduce emissions in whatever sectors you have control over. And so, again, just more examples. This is what every community gets. They get the chart, they get writing, and then they get more individual data.
Alec, can you explain a minute what the different scope numbers mean in case people don't know?
Yeah.
Is that later? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's later, but I can.
Okay. Nope. Do it later.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks, Kathy.
Sorry.
It's okay. So one last example I wanted to show is because we did work as a region, we also have the community emissions for the entire Northwest Indiana region. And this is a little different because we didn't do like a detailed inventory for the entire land mass of Northwest Indiana. What this came from was adding up Lake, Porter, and LaPorte counties, all of their scope 1 emissions, which, like Kathy mentioned, there's different scope emissions, which I'll explain here in a minute. But basically, scope 1 means it's in jurisdiction. So we didn't have any overlapping emissions between the counties to make sure that we didn't double count anything. So we also have this for the entire region. And as we did for Lake County, we did one chart that includes industry because it's important to recognize, but one that also excludes it, so you can get a more whole understanding of.
Hi, I found your door open. Well, you're.
Yeah, and then so now I'll talk a little bit more about how we got there, because those are the final results. You'll get charts that are really helpful. You'll get all the numbers and things like that. But getting there took a lot. And so to start off the summer, like Kathy mentioned, we did train with the IU Environmental Resilience Institute. All of the interns had several meetings with them, understanding greenhouse gas emissions, how to communicate the effects of climate change and things like that. And then we worked directly throughout the entire summer with ICLEI. And they, as far as I know, are like the authority for greenhouse gas emissions inventories in the United States, and I'm pretty well known globally, I'm pretty sure. But they provided us with weekly webinars where we learned about how to do these emissions inventories, and we had one-on-one meetings with them when needed to ask questions about our data and methodologies. And so they were helpful the entire way through. When we were doing these emissions inventories, we did follow a specific protocol called the GPC. I have its entire name here, Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventories. But what's important about the GPC, there are a couple different protocols we could have chosen to follow, but the important thing is consistency. So by following this nationally and internationally recognized protocol, we are following the same methodologies that other communities have followed and will continue to follow when they conduct these emissions reports. And so by keeping clear on the steps that we went through, outlined in these protocols, and following it very strictly, our work is reproducible and understandable. So when we want to go back and look at our data, we understand why we did things a certain way. Or if we want to do a future report, we'll follow the same protocol. So our data in the future is comparable to the data we have for 2017. The GPC outlines the different sectors that were mentioned in the charts before. So energy, transportation, waste, water and wastewater. And actually the industrial emissions category is kind of like an added perk. It's on GPC Plus. It's not on their basic plan, but we chose to include that even though it wasn't required, because for Northwest Indiana, it's really important to recognize those emissions. It's now starting to go more into the specifics for scope emissions of a community. And this, I think this is where Kathy saw it, but previously you could see the different scope emissions. So 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, all of those different things. I really like this graphic for explaining it. Basically, scope 1 are emissions that are directly attributable or given to a community. So it's things that you think of coming directly out of, say, a city's boundaries. So if there's a factory in the city, things like that, or in-boundary transportation, that only happens within that jurisdiction. Scope 2 is a little more hazy, but basically it accounts for all grid supplied energy that a community uses, regardless of that energy's source, if it's outside of the jurisdiction or inside the jurisdiction. Scope 3 are emissions that result from a community's activities, but the emissions themselves are taking place outside of the jurisdiction. So I think the biggest example of this is when I was working on Lake County's inventory, they would generate a lot of solid waste that would then be exported out of the county. So to make sure that all of that waste is accounted for and the emissions that the waste produces, even though it's exported out of the county, it's still the responsibility of Lake County. And so that's what scope 3 emissions are. And the differences between all of those took me a while to understand. I'm still understanding them. So it's really not too important for looking at the emissions as a whole, but it's an added perk if you understand them. So I will keep chugging along and going into data collection now. And this is where the more specific information comes from. I wanted to show you guys some examples of our methodologies for collecting data and the different types of sources that we have. So I'll have to share my screen to show some of that too. But basically, when we are collecting data, the easiest thing for us to do was to collect publicly available data when possible. So a lot of the emissions are directly reported by the EPA and a lot of other things, such for public transportation, are reported by NDOT. So a lot of our information did come from the EPA and NDOT, and then organizations like NERPC that gave us information on these emissions. And so I thought there might be, I'm gonna have to share my screen again, specific interest on where we got data for the industrial emissions. So let me show you an example of where we got publicly available data for industrial emissions. I have to find it. One of these tabs. Okay, so here, this is a tool developed by the EPA for reporting industrial emissions from large greenhouse gas emission sources. It's a law and a policy that industries and facilities emitting so many greenhouse gases every year have to report it to the EPA, and all of this is publicly available. So this is where, whenever we saw that big chunk of industrial energy data for example, Lake County, this is where it all comes from. So there are all these different facilities. And so I am just going to look at this one in particular. You click on the facility and it has specific information. But I had the joy of going through all of these numbers that are meticulously reported and detailed every single year for these industry facilities. And so the numbers came directly from these EPA reports for industry emissions. And so what I did was just grab the emissions for carbon dioxide, for methane, and things like that, and totaled them all up for an entire county or a community when the other interns had to do their communities. And so that's one example of a type of publicly available data specifically for industry. Besides looking at industrial data and things like that, we often work directly with county and city governments when possible. Government officials' information and insight into a community is invaluable. They often have information on their utilities and waste and things like that. Of course, different communities responded differently with getting information from direct county officials, but that's okay. We also worked with once those two options were gone, were the publicly available data and working with government officials, we had to contact these facilities directly. So we, I know I in particular, and all the interns, but speaking from my experience, I called and emailed several wastewater facilities, several water utilities, landfills, ports and harbors to get transportation data. And all of this is recorded in our notes and in our workbooks that we use, which can be shared as well if there's interest in that. But so that's where all the data comes from. It comes from publicly available sources, it comes from government entities, and it comes from the facilities themselves. And the data that we do collect, we collect different types of data. So sometimes we get activity data. And my best example of this is getting vehicle miles traveled. So VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, of course, does not directly equal emissions. But when we have this activity data, we multiply it by an emissions factor provided to us by the EPA or by ICLEI to get it to greenhouse gas emissions. So it might be that for every vehicle mile traveled, that equals so many tons of carbon dioxide. And that's just a given standard across the country or across the state based on vehicle fleet mix data and gasoline efficiency and things like that. And so that works across all different sectors. We have different emissions factors, like how much carbon dioxide for kilowatt hour of electricity provided by NIPSCO. So that's another example of that. But also sometimes facilities did provide direct emissions. So like I said, with the industry here, this isn't activity data. This is directly measured emissions. So we were able to use this directly. So those are generally the two types of data that we collected, was either activity data or direct emissions, and either worked. But with these different types of data, we did have to make a decent amount of assumptions. Like Kathy mentioned, when data wasn't available, which unfortunately was happening decently often, not terribly often, but it happened. We had to do population scaling. So if a community's water utility never got back to us, what we did was we made a note of that. And then based on a similar community, we used their water utilities data and scaled it to the other communities. So if Valparaiso's water utility gave us information and they have however many thousands of residents using that water utility and energy information from that utility, we take that information and based on how many residents are there using it, then we go over to another community like LaPorte. And LaPorte has however many thousands of residents. And based on the proportions, we can scale it so we get the correct energy amount based on an estimation. So saying for every 1,000 residents, we had this much energy going to Valparaiso. So we're going to assume for every 1,000 residents in LaPorte, we also have that much energy going. It's not a perfect assumption, but it's what we worked with and it works well enough. And we made note of that. And for all of the different types of assumptions we made when we had incomplete data, we made notes of that in our calculations and in reporting. And we also directly talked with ICLEI and ERI, or the Environmental Resilience Institute, to make sure that assumptions that we were making were legitimate. ICLEI has done several, probably hundreds of emissions reports, and they're very experienced with this. And so they've seen all of these issues before where communities don't have the best data, but you work with what you've got. And then even now, if data comes in, we have the option to update it with more accurate data. And so The last thing I was going to show is the tool that we used for all of this, which is developed directly by ICLEI. It's called Clearpath. I have to find it. So Clearpath is the calculator and tool developed by ICLEI that generates all of these reports. It is really the backbone for these emissions inventories that we use. So it is a tool that allows direct entry of all of our data, and it outputs everything we need to write a report. So just an example, like these are the types of charts it gives us, like inventory emissions by sector. So I'll be looking at Lake County again, just because that's one of the ones I'm responsible for. So you can see how many metric tons of emissions are for industrial energy, for transportation and things like that. So it gives us reports, but then it also, this is where we input all of the different records. So I was just going to show an example of a few different ones so you can see what we are working with over the entire summer. So for example, in residential energy, we got data directly from NIPSCO. And so if I go look at Lake County's NIPSCO electricity data, this is what NIPSCO gave us. They gave us so many kilowatt hours of electricity used in 2017. They gave us how many households they went to. And what Clearpath does is, based on these numbers that we put in, it outputs all of the different emissions that we need for reporting. And it has a whole bunch of data that is really specific that you don't really need to look at. And this is why when we wrote the report, we really tried to emphasize what's important, but we do include everything that's there. Another example, going back to industry again, for Lake County there, this is not normal. For Lake County, there are a lot of industry inputs. And so if we look again at that record that I was looking at from the flight tool, you directly input the emissions of CO2, CH4, and N2O, and it spits out how many metric tons of emissions that is. And then again, for transportation, we have like on-road gasoline. And what we did was we were given vehicle miles traveled by NERC and NDOT, and then vehicle fleet mix data, and it's gasoline. So then it outputs everything. And here's just an example of the notes that everyone will be able to see. If you go into Clearpath, these will stay here in this Clearpath record. And so you can see all of the different calculations I've made and things like that. And so for every record, it's detailed along the way what we've done. And then I also wanted to give one last example where we had to do population scaling. Most of the population scaling had to do with water utilities. And so here in my notes, I explain how I got this information. So we had data from Valparaiso, and we didn't have data for Hammond. So Valparaiso gave us this information, and based on Valparaiso's population using this amount of energy, we were able to estimate how much energy Hammond would use based on their population. So it's a pretty simple calculation, just using proportions, but it's detailed and everything is right there. And I believe that's everything. I probably missed something along the way. So if you have any questions, do let me know. I know it was a lot.
Thank you, Alec. I'm really just so grateful for you making the time to be here. There's no way I could have repeated that back. Even though I sat in on every webinar, I just, it's, you guys really did deep dives. Kathy, do you want to say anything, Kathy Luther? I mean, you were right there along with us for most of the ride, or just
Yeah,
open it up.
well, I was really impressed with all of the students and all the work they did. and I mostly listened and tried to find other resources for data. I think that this was the first year there were any counties, and there was one other county besides our 3 counties, and I think that counties are a lot different than cities, right? They don't have one water utility, right? They have a lot of, so that was a whole learning curve for all of us, ERI and us as well. Uh, some plans we have going forward is to work on when we know because we did use a lot of we used data, but we also used kind of assumptions in some cases. So for example, we know that there's some communities that have done alternative fuel projects, or companies that are located in a city or a place that might not use diesel. So it's impossible at the scale that these tools are assembled to really include that in the calculations at this point. But we can talk about it in the narrative. So we thought we'd do kind of site stories for those examples, and we're going to be adding those in. So one of the things that Kathy Sipple and I talked about is this kind of being a living document that as we get more information, we can add it to, or, we know that NIPSCO has a plan to shift their energy mix. So that'll be really interesting as that comes for, we go back and do future inventory. So we can talk a little bit about things that we know are on the books to happen or things that have already happened, and that they will make a difference. The ones that it's possible to calculate a difference. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how our own transportation emissions models works, because I literally read the paper about how they calculate greenhouse gas emissions, and didn't fall asleep. So anyway, so I think it's real cool. I have to confess that I was dragged into this project kicking and screaming. And I'm glad we did it. I think as long as everybody understands what it's for, what it is and what it is not, and what we can use it for. And some of the communities participated really wholeheartedly, and some of them maybe didn't, and some of them still haven't paid us. But we're going to be working that out. Some of them did not understand the paper they signed. But anyway, I'm just really pleased that I think that we tried to address as many of the concerns we heard going in. A couple things also I don't think we really were able, and Alec, you can correct me, to do a lot with land use and forestry and agriculture sector. And I think that that could be something we could tweak in the future, especially for the county scale, because it's a lot bigger deal. And I know that a lot of us involved in conservation think that we may be part of the answer in sequestration. So that's kind of just like thinking about ways to use this in the future or what to do with it. I hope you guys have questions.
There is a question in chat. If
Okay.
you want, I can moderate. Susan McCullough asked, does what Hammond uses in terms of water include all the water they send out of Hammond, i.e. Munster? Now, Alec, I'll go ahead and turn that over to you. Does that have to do with the scope once again?
That's a pretty specific question that I'm not sure I have a great answer to. Because for water utilities in particular, what we did when we did population scaling, I believe Hammond was one of the ones I showed that had population scaling, is what I did, because it fell into one of my counties, was I looked at an EPA database of public water utility systems. And so it said that the Hammond utility system served a population of whatever number for their community. And that's the population I scaled to. I don't have more specific information than that.
Well, who did who did Highland and Munster?
Warren.
So we should double check that, because they buy their water from Hammond.
She did
So
make inquiry.
made sure it wasn't, so it's not double counted.
Right. I
Okay.
know her methodology was that she reached out to them, whether she got that information or not. I'm
Okay.
not sure. And I do want to acknowledge that I did see Kay's hand up first and then Lori's. I saw
Mhm.
Susan's note in chat before those. That it's not perfect answer, but
Right.
the person who did that specificity isn't here and we don't have access to her ICLEI account, I don't think. So
And
we'll
that's
follow up.
one of the reasons we want to make it a living document. I know I didn't have as much time to really get in the weeds about, I mean, some of that is specific knowledge and not able to work one-on-one with the interns on it. So we'll be doing some stuff like that, double checking, things like that.
Good question though. We did implement, well, Julianne Rosser, I'll just say she had a GIS background. And so
Mhm.
we did map a lot of like zip codes and
Mhm.
boundaries and to try to really make sure that we weren't double counting anything,
Mhm.
which probably took a lot more time for us
Mhm.
working on this regionally. Most interns that were just assigned one city, you know, it was pretty straightforward for them. We didn't have to go through all that rigmarole, but we did
Mhm.
spend a lot of time. So let's go to Kay and then Lori. Kay, you have your hand up. You've been patient.
Thank you, Kathy. Alec, my name's Kay Nelson, and I am Director of Environmental Affairs for a regional economic development organization and a member of Kathy's board. Our members include the large industries. And so when this idea first came forward, my industry guys had one request, and that was that you use pre-existing data that they report on an annual basis to EPA as part of your calculations. So thank you for making certain that got done, to the leadership of the project and to the students. This is certainly a huge endeavor to bite off on. It's evident you have done a great deal of research in preparing your report, so we're very appreciative of that from a business community as well. And as a young gentleman getting close to leaving college, you have a very good presence in making presentations. Your diction, your word, your organization skills and your presentation were very, very, very good. So keep up that good work. And then what wasn't on my to-do list on this question was, I can answer a little bit on the Hammond water situation. To make it even more murky, the city of Hammond does provide water to Illinois communities. So you have not only the water going to Hammond and Munster and Griffith from Highland, Munster and Griffith from Hammond, you have water going to Illinois that would probably be part of that calculation. So when the young lady who did that particular portion is back in the area, I can get those numbers out of Hammond for her.
I gave them, I had done that for the 2040 plan when in the water section, I literally had the populations of all the Illinois, I had that all figured out. So I did give that to them, but I'm not, so with, I'll be able to ask her, that was one of the things I wanted to go back and check if they actually got the water purchased, if they were working with Munster and they got a water volume purchased from Hammond for Munster, then that would have been done that way, not with Hammond. So it's just a matter of making sure that that same got subtracted.
I definitely recall that
Yeah.
conversation. I feel like I know more
Yeah.
about water than I ever would have imagined. But it was interesting the way that ERI did their webinars. It was kind of by sector. So, you know, for instance, 1 week we did water, 1 week we did transportation, we did like a deep dive. So they did talk about those kinds of things, Kay. And I know it came up, but any specific knowledge you could lend would be really, really great. We obviously want it to be accurate. Yeah. So I see Kay muted again. So should we go to Lori? Lori's been patient with her hand up.
Thank you. Kay, did you have anything else? I didn't want to step on your time on the floor. So thank you. I echo everything that Kay said. Alec, phenomenal job, wonderful presentation. And we too were supportive of using real data. So thrilled that information came forward. Alec, as Kay did in introducing her organization, we are South Shore Clean Cities. We are a nonprofit organization, Sustainable Transportation Organization, that is contracted with NERC for air quality programming. So that comes out in a number of different ways, one of which is our Green Fleet program, which aims to reduce transportation-related emissions throughout our region. So just very happy. Appreciate you also pulling out some of that industry data and showing what it looks like when you pull that out and where transportation really lies. That was another question we had, and one of the portions of the discussions we were having with NERC and with the resilience group on, well, what are some things, if our industrial numbers are high, what can our local jurisdictions do about that? That's not really a jurisdictional issue. So making that that comparison and showing where transportation lies in areas where we are already working hard is very much appreciated. I did have just a few questions because I just want to make sure I understand. When you say region-wide with your data, are you speaking specifically to participating jurisdictions, or were you pulling data in another way?
Yeah, so that's a little tricky because not every single community in the 3 counties signed up for an inventory report. But working at the county level, so when I did Lake and Porter counties, my county inventory includes the entire county. It doesn't exclude specific communities.
Got it.
It's just that for the communities that signed up, like Chesterton, for example, that's one of them that comes to mind. It gets an individual section in the report, but the county overall covers everything in the county.
Great. I just want to make sure I understand. And then with transient transportation, everything that's moving through on our highways and such, is that captured in that section 3 or sector 3? Am I understanding that? Was there a capture there?
Yeah, so that's a little tricky too. I'm still trying to grasp that myself, but I do know there's ways to, we did try to account for especially emphasizing in-jurisdictional transportation. So a trip that starts within boundary and ends within boundary, because that's of course more within a community's jurisdiction to control, and things that start in boundary and end out of boundary. Those emissions were still accounted for, but we only counted, I believe the calculation that ICLEI recommends is 50% of those.
Okay.
And so it's all, I can try to look more specifically at the report of how it reports them scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. I believe that's scope 3 if it goes in to out, but it's accounted for somehow.
Okay. And then, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kathy, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, to the extent the VMT came from our transportation model and emissions model from that the through freight, and that is primarily generated from a national freight traffic model, I believe.
Okay.
So most likely Scott has it assigned to transportation model zones and then assigned it to the various jurisdictions that way.
Sure. I've got 2 more very quick questions. So I know we'd also talked a little bit about how the modeling initially was counting like a 1990 class 8 semi trucks emissions, the same as it was counting those of like a 2020 or 2021. And we know that the technology's changed over time. The fuels have changed. So many things have changed to pull those down. Do you know if there was any adjustments made for how those were calculated?
I think we didn't, Alec, we didn't use the emissions from us. We just used the VMT from us, right?
We had VMT from NERC. I believe we also got vehicle fleet mix data.
Yeah.
I don't know the specifics of it.
I do know, Lori, that one of the things we kind of were waiting for, so we're getting a new update to MOVE's model from EPA going forward, and I read those papers, and they upgraded the mix, the fleet mixes. That's one of the big parts of that upgrade. So I'm hoping we might update the transportation part with that sooner than later.
Sure. And last question, I appreciate you indulging me. If you had to estimate how much was modeling versus real data, what would you say, Alex? I know that you said, you had to kind of go with what you had, and I understand that. How much would you say was real data, and how much would you say is modeling?
That is a very good question that I probably should have considered beforehand. But I think at the county level in particular, and I can speak for that because I did Lake and Porter counties, I would have to say the majority is modeling and assumptions and estimations like that. If you want an exact percentage, I don't know, probably 70% is modeling, just because at the county level, it would be nearly impossible for me to contact every single utility and things like that, which it can be done in the future to update the data. But in individual communities, I'd have to speak to the other interns again, but I know some of the interns had very accurate data that came directly from their utilities. So some of them, the majority very well is probably just accurately reported data rather than modeling. But at the county level, it is a decent amount of assumption.
Great, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you to you and Kay again for the kind words. I really appreciate it.
I was wondering if Jennifer or Richard or anyone who participated from the cities would have any feedback. I know, like some of the categories, like he was saying, a city or a town that has its own wastewater plant, its own utility, and its own water utility, and it's kind of contained and they know what they have. But out in the other areas, there's multiple conservancy districts and multiple public water suppliers, and it just kind of I want to say exponentially increases the the complication. But I don't know, Jennifer, do you have any feedback of what you thought about this process? I know you were on you were one of the most frequent attendees of the webinars.
And if I couldn't attend, at least our town manager tried to attend.
Yeah.
Alec, I agree, man, that presentation was fabulous. Like, for a college kid giving a presentation, and granted, you're not standing in front of people trying to imagine them in their underwear or something like that. You did a great job.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so, this was an extreme learning curve for me. And air quality is not my forte. I appreciate all the work that the interns did. I have not seen the results for Chesterton yet, and I'm curious to see it. We had some crossover because our wastewater treatment plant also services a conservancy and another town. So I'd be interested to see, how that comes out. And we do have a lot of transient transportation. We've got the toll road, 94, 49. Crosses all of our boundaries. So I'm curious to see how that even compares to the county overall. I really don't have any questions at this time, but just really appreciate this effort and look forward to the information and how we can present it then to our council.
That kind of feels like an opportunity for me to reclaim the baton. Would that be okay, Kathy?
Yep, perfect.
Right. That's kind of where I wanted to pick it up is, the whole object of this game was obviously not to just produce a report, but to get it back to the communities and help them, to be able to do something with it. It's my understanding that communities that have this baseline data, all their things being equal, sometimes it makes them better poised to get grants. If you can say, this is why we want this money, this is the baseline, this is the needle that we're looking to move. So, that's part of the strategy that I'm looking forward to putting together to help not only utilize what we have, but, to parlay that into the climate action steps next year. So the application for that will open in October. Application will be due in December. And unlike the greenhouse gas inventory that started in May, June, the climate action plan actually begins with participating cities and counties in January and runs an entire year. So the cost per jurisdiction is incrementally a little bit higher because ICLEI is providing technical assistance for a year rather than just 3-4 months. But I am really working on securing funding to make it possible for anybody who wants to keep this momentum going forward to help make that happen. So we, probably would need to pass on at least a little bit of the cost, ask the cities or counties to pick up their own ICLEI license, for instance, which, Jennifer, I do want to remind you, you do have access, because I think you paid the $300 or whatever it was. If you're like me, I go on there and I'm like, great, what do I do with it? It's in there, right? But you too could hit a report and put it in any format that you wanted, but I will absolutely get you the reports that we do have. We just kind of wanted to hold back before putting them out there in a public way, because like Kay noted, hey, the pie charts weren't consistent, and that was 5 different people all preparing work a little bit differently with limited opportunities for co-working. So those were some of the tweaks I acknowledge and wanted to also make before we, publish it. But
Maybe
okay.
Maybe we can, Kathy, once when that's done, we can offer to meet with the different communities, kind of one-on-one, their technical people to go through it. Before we hit them up and then say, and now we want to plan. Okay.
All right. Oh, Kay, did you have something else? I'm sorry.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I've only been doing this for 15 or 18 months. I don't get it. I don't know. I sent this, I thought I sent it to everyone. It just went to Lori.
Oh, maybe it did.
But to follow up on Lori's or Kathy's comment about funding, future funding, Lori had a question on the modeling versus actual data in the development of this. And I think that it would be advantageous if the report did have that breakdown for each of the areas that were studied, not to be a criticism point, but rather to give you a point of, hey, we need funding to figure out how to get actual data in these particular categories. So, that would help everyone, the general public, to better understand what is an estimate. That would help the funders that you might approach on, okay, this was an estimate, and so what can we do to help us get actual? And how can you help fund us to get that actual? So just an idea going forward. I don't know how much additional work that might be, but even if it's a general, I mean, Alec threw out 70%. God bless you for throwing out a number off the cuff. But I think that would be very helpful going forward, because you may find that there are persons out there or parties out there who may have access to data that doesn't go onto an EPA website, for example, that could help in making the models become more close to actual. So thank you.
We did do our best to, throw open the welcome doors and let people know what we were up to and invite that data to appear. And we just had a very limited time frame, about 10 weeks with the students. So if it didn't show up during that time, it wasn't even a matter of money. It's just like, they're back in school. I don't have anybody. We do have Julianne though. So this is the thing. We have her through the end of the year. And so if we can still get data, we don't have to cap it at 70% right now. We could potentially still make improvements before releasing.
I mean, I think it's going to be different per component of the pie chart also. I mean, the transportation is all modeled. I mean, it just is. And then the solid waste, that was mostly modeled because it was almost impossible to deaggregate, I think.
And Alec has his hand up, so he might have something.
So, I mean,
Alec, what?
I was just going to say, maybe revising that number. I'm not going to change the number, but for a lot of the important categories, like you saw for what I did for industry, that's all completely accurate and not modeled. And like you saw for the region, that's 70-80% of emissions. But when it comes down to, if you want to say for all of the records, there are a lot of records, especially around water utility and things like that, that are modeled, but proportionally, they're also they're not as significant in emissions. So I should probably clarify that a lot of the important information, like energy, is very accurate.
That's true. Yeah, because that came straight from NIPSCO.
All right.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Kathy Luther, thank you to NERC, and thank you to this committee for allowing us to come together and do this work. It was truly a collaborative effort. It could not have happened without a lot of cooperation. So really deeply appreciative and really grateful to see where we can go with it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. And that was a great presentation, Alec and Kathy and everybody at NERC. Thank you very much. And like you said, Kathy, a big picture, I think is a great example of kind of a grassroots kind of movement happening, and government and NERC and everybody kind of responding to it and working with everybody. So I really appreciate everybody's work on it. And then let's move on. I know everybody's got, I'm sure, a schedule, and we're running a little long, but this is great stuff. I appreciate it. Moving on to Dan. Dan, are you ready for the Solar United Neighbors update?
Thanks, Bill. Yes, I am. Thanks to the committee for making time for me to talk briefly. I'll try not to take up too much of your time, but I think it's a good segue from what Kathy and Alec were talking about. And I just want to say thanks to Kathy and Alec for that presentation. Like everybody else, I thought it was a really informative presentation. I work for Solar United Neighbors. I am the Northern Indiana organizer. And Solar United Neighbors is a national nonprofit that's working to help people go solar and advocate for solar policy at the state and national level. We have a presence in 12 states in Washington, D.C., including in Indiana. And one of our main pieces of work in Indiana is helping to develop solar co-ops. And a co-op is basically an opportunity for individuals, homeowners, and small businesses to come together to consider purchasing a solar array, solar system for their home or small business at a co-op valued price. And we recently had a co-op in Northwest Indiana. We helped 8 households go solar over the 2021 calendar or time period. And we're getting ready to launch another one in mid-September, around September 13th. And so I just want to kind of get on here real quick and say, tell you a little bit about that and encourage you to maybe consider being a partner or help us promote that co-op, because I think it's a great opportunity for communities to encourage a reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions and maybe put into practice some of the things that Kathy and Alec were talking about. We have a number of local partners that are working with us on this co-op, including NERC, who is a co-partner for this with us, and we're very grateful for that. But along with them, we also have partners with 219 Green Connect that Kathy helps lead, so we're grateful for that. She and Kathy Luther both have been a great helping in getting this co-op launched, along with the Michigan City Sustainability Commission and the Northwest Indiana Green Drinks. Those are local sponsors as well. We also work with a number of state partners, including Earth Charter Indiana. We're grateful for the support of that organization. So what I'm hoping we can, I'm asking you all to consider, like I said, is for your communities to be a partner with us on the co-op, or to help spread the word about the co-op. We can provide you with information about how people can get connected to us. We offer a number of different solar 101 informational sessions that people can learn about solar and rooftop solar for their home or small business. We have some of those coming up once a month on webinars. We also have an in-person sort of a hybrid model for the Solar 101 session where you can either attend in person or see it online as well. And so if that's going to be taking place in Michigan City on October 21st. So we're also looking for folks in the 3-county area that might be willing to sponsor a Solar 101 in a different part of the region. And we can also provide you with promotional materials if you want to post on social media or share it in a newsletter. Yeah, so that's just a quick 1, 2, 3 about that. If anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan. That's great. Yeah. And could we circulate something, Kathy, maybe about that? And
Yep.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I'd like to learn more about that. Yeah.
And we were planning to distribute the information from that Dan has out through the EMPC list. Yeah, that's probably all I was going to say. Through the EMPC list
Okay.
and the probably the commission list as well. So we'll be sharing that with all of
right,
you too. But maybe Dan, is it okay if I could send people who ask your contact information?
Absolutely, and I can type that in the chat box as well. So if people need that.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, moving on. Item 7 here, we have the program updates.
Oh, yeah.
Anything you want to?
Yeah, I was actually gonna, I'm gonna kind of add these to the agenda as a routine thing, like the different things we're doing right now at NERC. But the air quality and green fleets, I was gonna turn that over to Lori Kegel to give a update, since she usually does in announcements.
Thank you. So I'll be quick. I can read quickly. So on Tuesday of this week, our executive director, Carl Lissick, presented on a webinar with Mitch Barloga on micromobility in the region. It was a really good one. The recording is on the NERC YouTube channel on the South Shore website. Micromobility are single person, I'm sorry, you're probably hearing the landscape crew right outside my door, so I apologize. But micromobility is really a single person vehicle. So scooters, bicycles, et cetera, those kind of shared programs you see in cities. So really the top takeaway was that cities with successful programs across the US have paired them with various transportation modes. So like existing transit stations. It was very interesting. Mitch also had a lot of great information about working with planning organizations before you embark on one of these programs for bikes or scooters in your community. So if you have questions, contact our office, contact Mitch. We'd be happy to work with you. Also on the IDEMBW grant program, the next committee meeting is 9 a.m. September 14th. The agenda items include round 3 on-road and non-road grant project scoring and selection. We as South Shore Clean Cities through the NERC Green Fleet program, we submitted 9 grant requests for our members and partners in the NERC region. The total request was for more than $5.4 million for projects totaling more than $17.1 million. We had Class 8 electric truck applications, 5 CNG vehicle replacements, City of Hobart. We had, I'm trying to count these all up, just a ton of them. So I'm excited about that. We'll have information at the next meeting on the outcome of those. We anticipate they'll continue to be successful. I believe I've reported at earlier meetings that we also were selected by IDEM initially, or recommended by IDEM to the committee, to run a statewide electric vehicle outreach, education, and marketing campaign for the statewide electric vehicle charging system that's going to be funded through this project. They recommended that be a solicitation process. That solicitation, so we did apply. That's also going to be considered at this September 14th meeting, and we anticipate good results. So we're excited about that one. Also want to make sure folks know that through our contract with NERC, we are working to develop a Northwest Indiana Clean Air website to serve as a clearinghouse for information on all clean air programs in the region that are supported by NERC. Things like the Green Fleet Program, Partners for Clean Air, our Region Man campaign. That development is ongoing, and we hope to make it live this fall. So stay tuned for that. Also want to let you know, we have a paid fall internship available at South Shore Clean Cities. We're looking for a communications student. I need help to work with me. So applications are technically due tomorrow, but if you contact me and let me know that you've got this fabulous student who might be interested, I'd be more than happy to take that into consideration. And as part of our Green Fleet program, we do have another event coming up. This is October 26th. This one's in the city of South Bend. And we're partnering with the South Bend Office of Sustainability and the Michiana Area Council of Governments. That's the NERC equivalent in the South Bend region. This is much like the event that we just had in Michigan City, exhibit booths, indoor vehicle displays, breakout sessions. This one focuses a bit more on operations and facilities, but we do have a track that is on clean fleets as well. So you can register on the website for South Shore Clean Cities or contact me directly with questions. And that's it for me. Appreciate it.
Okay. I just wanted to give people an update. The other main large project going on, well, for me, is a Brownfields project that we have a coalition with the Kay at the Northwest Indiana Forum Foundation and Jill Huber at the RDA. And we're actually almost close to having committed all our funds, and we've done a lot of phase 1s and some phase 2s and some kind of exciting places. We did a phase 1 and a phase 2 and a cleanup plan for 5400 Klein, which is the East Chicago General Services. Like there's an ancient incinerator there. Some other sites that seem really hard to touch on, and just that that project I think is going pretty well. I just wanted to let people know we're still doing that. We do have capacity to do some more projects, and we do have an application if any communities or developers want to work with us. Please let myself or Kay know, and we can get an application out so that we're probably 2/3 committed out our funds to 3/4 committed on our funds. So we still have funding left, especially projects for petroleum money. So we are still looking for projects we can do assessments. We can do assessments prior to purchasing so that people have liability protection, and then we can do phase 2 investigations and cleanup planning if for a lot of different types of sites and projects. Oh, Kay's hand is up. Is that still from before? And you're muted though.
That's because a bunch of people in the hallway. I'm just trying to manage their noise. Just to build on what Kathy is saying, we're very excited because the coalition chose to develop an application that required the interested party to be real, to make certain that they had a plan in place and that they've already spoken to the community or the counties in which they are planning to use this phase 1 money on properties for redevelopment, economic development. So I'm particularly proud of the fact that every project that we have funded has a future end use on the immediate horizon. We are bound and determined not to allow these documents that have a shelf life of 6 months to expire without seeing something move forward. And we do have a few projects that we have funded that have resulted in actual investments and retention of jobs that were pre-existing or creation of new jobs. And so, as Kathy mentioned, we have a little bit more money left, but just want folks to understand that if you don't have a line of communication with the community, we're not going to consider your application, because we want the community to be supportive of what they want to, what they're applying to, for the grant money to be used so they can do. So we're pretty pumped, and we're looking forward to applying for an extension or another
grant.
iteration.
And then for community tree, we are doing a fall round of trees. Joe said October 6th will be the workshop and tree pickup. So I think very shortly he'll be putting out an application for trees. So just keep if you're a person that, or a community or nonprofit that has purchased trees from us, or not purchased, received trees from us before, or someone that hasn't, please stay tuned for, and I think that is the last round of trees under our existing grants, although we do have another grant pending with the Forest Service. I think that's what I had for updates, but mark October 6th if you're planning to apply for trees this year as the workshop and pickup date.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. And moving on to announcements, I will start with announcements. Our office, the Lake County Surveyor's Office, is kind of rolling out our junior surveyor program. So we're kind of targeting elementary school age kids and going out and doing kind of outreach and information about surveying, engineering, and environmental issues, kind of more focused on water issues, because that's what we do here. So if you know of anybody, we're gonna be going out to River Forest elementary schools next week or the week after right now. But I'm gonna post a link there if anybody knows anyone in Lake County who might want us to come by and speak. We do it virtually too, or parents too have submitted a little activity online, and we give the kids a little badge that says they're junior Lake County surveyor and a little certificate. So if you know of anyone who's interested, just pass it along. Any other announcements? All right. Anyone? All right. We have our next meeting scheduled for October 7th, 9 a.m. Unless there's anything else, we will stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for today's meeting. Thanks for coming. Nice to see everybody.
Mhm.